A dark romance series, The Monster Who Owned Me, Part 4 The Exposure. The thing about being truly known by someone is that you cannot unknow them in return. You are both now without armor. The question is only who will use it first. Chapter 1. Before the world finds out Violet 12 WEKS in Saturday MORNINGI woke up in his building. Not in the penthouse. I want to be clear about that, because clarity matters, and because the story of how I came to be sleeping on a daybed in the studio on the 18th floor at 6:45 on a Saturday morning is, like most things in this building, more complicated than it appears. We had worked until 2 a.m. The installation mock-up had reached a stage that demanded 12 consecutive hours of attention, and somewhere around midnight, I had stopped being able to distinguish fatigue from focus, and he had appeared in the studio with a blanket and said, with the characteristic economy of a man who does not over-explain practical decisions, "The daybed is yours if you want it," and left before I could respond. So I'd slept in the studio. Surrounded by the hanging glass and the light and the smell of the materials I'd been working with for 12 weeks, and the city had made its nighttime sounds below, and I had slept better than I had in months. I was sitting up with coffee, made in the small kettle I'd started keeping in the studio sometime in week 6, another one of the small domestications of the space that had accumulated without decision, when my phone screen lit up with a notification. Then another. Then a third, fourth, fifth, the alerts coming in with the specific rapid rhythm of something happening in real time. I picked it up, the headline read, "Kane's Hidden World. Billionaire CONCALS critically ill former lover in secret floor of his flagship tower." Below it, a photograph. Floor 17. The corridor. And Alina's name, her medical conditions summarized in 3 brutal sentences, and the address of the building she was in, and the floor she was on. I was calling Adrian before I'd finished reading. He answered on the first ring. His voice was already different, the measured control compressed, tighter, the sound of someone who has already received the information and is 3 steps into managing it. "I know," he said. "No, I'm handling it. Are you in the building?" 18. There, a pause, brief and total. "Don't go to 17, not yet, let me get to her first." The line went quiet. I sat in the studio with the phone in my hand, and the notifications still coming. The story spreading with the particular velocity of things that have been waiting to be known, filling the spaces prepared for them, and I looked at the installation around me. The suspended glass, the salvaged timber, the light beginning to come through the windows as the city woke up. I thought about Alina in her room below me, waking to the same notifications, or worse, to someone calling her, someone who had read her medical records in a headline, someone who knew her address and her condition and her floor number. I went to 17 anyway. She was already up. Of course she was already up, Alina Vasic painted when she was afraid, which I'd come to understand was her version of what I did when I was afraid, which was sketch, which was what most artists do with fear, turn it into material. She was at the canvas when I came in, and the painting she was making was red and angular and furious in a way her work usually wasn't, and she didn't look at me when I came in. "He called," she said. "I know. He's on his way. He'll want to move me. Probably." "Don't want to be moved." She put the brush down, turned. Her face was very controlled, the way faces are controlled when the thing underneath is very large. "This is my room. I have made it mine. I have been safe here." A pause, her jaw setting. "I will not be moved because someone wrote something." "Alina, I know what it means when the address is published," she said. "I know what it means that people can find me now. I am not naive about that." Her voice was steady, but I could hear what it was costing. "But I will not become invisible again because someone with a grudge decided to use me as a weapon. I have been invisible enough." Room was quiet except for the city, which was louder this morning already, the building's ground floor no doubt attracting the attention the headline had directed. "Tell me what you need," I said. She looked at me. "Tell him I'm not leaving." "Him yourself," I said. "He listens to you." A brief, complicated expression. "He listens to you more," she said. "Right now. Whether he knows it or not." I heard the elevator. His footsteps in the corridor, faster than usual, the pace of someone who has set aside the managed calm because the situation doesn't leave room for it. He came through the door and stopped. He looked at Alina first, the full inventory check I recognized, and then at me, and then back at Alina, and then something in him shifted, the emergency response modulating into something more present, less strategic, the actual human being stepping in front of the crisis manager. "Are you all right?" he said, to Alina. "Angry," she said. which is different from not all right. Something that might have been relief moved through his expression. Good, he said. Stay angry. Chapter 2. What he does when the walls come down violet. The morning was controlled chaos. Controlled because Adrian managed it. Which is to say, he made calls in the corridor in a voice too low to hear through the door, and people arrived at the building with the speed of people who have been told that speed is required, and decisions were made and executed in the compressed timeline of someone who has crisis infrastructure and knows how to use it. Chaos because none of the decisions, made at that speed, could account for every variable, and Alina was a variable with opinions. She refused the safe house. She refused the medical transport to a different facility. She agreed, after 40 minutes of negotiation conducted partly through me, partly directly with Adrian, partly through Nora, who had appeared at 8 a.m. in full professional mode with a laptop and a legal pad, and the expression of someone who has handled crises before and finds this one, while serious, within manageable parameters. She agreed to enhanced security on the floor. New protocols on the access card system. The removal of the camera feed from any network that could be accessed outside the building, and she agreed, for the first time in 8 months, to move out of the studio space during the day, not to leave the floor, but to spend her working hours in a secondary room that didn't appear on any of the building's public documentation. It is a compromise, she told me, while Adrian was in the corridor. Not a concession. I want that distinction. Noted, I said. Also tell him he is not to blame himself. He will spend the next week blaming himself, and it will be tedious for everyone. You can tell him that. I have told him. He does not hear it from me. He hears things from you now. A pause. She looked at me with the direct, assessing gaze I'd come to understand as her version of warmth. You are good for him. I want you to know I think that, whatever happens. Whatever happens, I repeated. There is a storm coming, she said simply. I have been inside storms before. They change things. I want you to know before the changing that I think you are right for him. She picked up her brush. The conversation was over. By noon, the building's lobby had press outside it. Not many, 4 journalists, 2 photographers, the advance guard of something that would grow if it wasn't managed. Adrian's security team had the entrance handled, and the story was already being worked on at the legal level. 3 different lawyers on 3 different tracks. Defamation, privacy violations, the sourcing of the medical records that had clearly been obtained illegally. I knew, watching him work, that he would find the leak. It was not a question. A man who had maintained a secret of this magnitude for 8 months in a 42-floor building with hundreds of employees did not fail to find a single source when he had reason to look. The question was only how long it would take and what he would do when he found it. What I didn't know, what I spent the morning not asking, because the morning had enough, was what this meant for Varden. Whether Adrian had connected the leak to Varden yet. Whether the legal machinery he was deploying knew what I knew. That a board member had made a phone call. I found out at 2 o'clock. He came to the studio, finally, after 6 hours of managed crisis, and he actually sat, in the chair by the window that was technically a guest chair but had become, over 12 weeks, implicitly his, and he looked at the installation, and he was quiet for a long time. He looked exhausted in a way I hadn't seen before. Not physically. Adrian Kane's physical endurance was, I'd come to understand, genuinely remarkable, the product of someone who had decided that his body was a system requiring maintenance and had maintained it accordingly. But the exhaustion underneath the physical, the kind that comes from sustained vigilance, from years of managing alone, from being the only person in a room who is not allowed to be tired. It was Varden, he said. Not a question. I assumed, I said. He used an investigator who sourced the medical records from the treatment facility Alina was in before I moved her, illegally obtained. The journalist he used has a history of working with sources who operate in that. He stopped. It doesn't matter. The records, the access logs, the photograph of the corridor, all traceable. The legal case is clean. Varden, his jaw tightened. Varden will resign from the board by end of business Monday. That is not a prediction. That is a fact that Varden does not yet know. Calmness in his voice was the specific calmness of someone who is very angry and has decided that the anger is a resource to be deployed rather than expressed. Are you all right? I asked. He looked at me. The question seemed to surprise him, not its content but its direction, the fact of being asked rather than asking. No, he said. Not currently. That's honest. You prefer honest. I always prefer honest. He looked at the installation, the glass, the light, the slowly assembling thing that had been growing in this room for 12 weeks. Something in his face, looking at it, shifted from the managed crisis register into something quieter. She's not leaving, I said. Elena, she told me. I know, a pause. She told me the same thing several times in increasing detail. She also told me not to let you blame yourself. He was quiet for a moment. She knows me too well. Does, I said. So do I now. Enough to tell you the same thing. He looked at me across the studio. It's my fault, he said. The security was mine to maintain. The leak happened inside my structure, I said. And you'll fix it. You've already fixed most of it. That's what you do. I paused. But you are not allowed to spend the next week dismantling yourself over it while the work in front of you requires your actual attention. A beat. That is very specifically phrased. Been studying you for 12 weeks, I said. I know how you self-destruct. Something moved in his expression, the almost smile, and beneath it something warmer, something that had been there since Friday night and the installation and the first name register and the real smile. Something that was still there despite the morning. Not going to let me, he said. Not a question. No, I said. I'm not. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he leaned back in the chair and tilted his head and looked at the ceiling with the expression of someone setting something down. All right, he said. All right. All right, I'll stop. I looked at him. That was easier than expected. Learning, he said, the almost smile fully present. You're a good teacher. Chapter 3, The Interview, Violet. The following week the story did not die on its own. This was not surprising. A story about a secretive billionaire, a hidden woman, a secret floor. These were the elements that fed themselves, that gathered velocity from their own momentum. The original article spawned responses. Think pieces about the ethics of secrecy and care, debates about privacy versus public interest, speculation about the nature of Adrian's relationship with Elena that ranged from compassionate to lurid, depending on the publication's appetite. His lawyers were efficient. The original article's most egregious privacy violations were challenged, and several elements were retracted. The sourcing of the medical records generated its own legal proceedings. Varden's resignation from the board was announced on Monday, as Adrian had said it would be, framed as a personal decision in language that was technically true in the same way that controlled demolitions are technically accidents. But the story had escaped the building. That was the nature of stories once they were out. They lived in the spaces between the retractions, in the screenshots and the shares, in the particular hunger of the public for the private lives of people who had been very private. Adrian's communications team proposed a response. A statement. A carefully worded acknowledgement that addressed the privacy violations without confirming the details. Adrian rejected it. I was in the studio when the communications director, a precise, capable woman named Judith, who had clearly been through this kind of thing before, and clearly found this particular client more challenging than most, came to find me on a Tuesday afternoon with an expression that suggested she had already exhausted her direct line. He won't do a statement, she said, without preamble. He says statements are performances, and he won't perform for people who violated his privacy. Also won't do an interview. He has, however, a slight pause, suggested that you might. I stared at her. I'm sorry, he said, and I'm quoting that you would say it correctly, that you understand what it is without needing to be briefed on what to say. I thought about this for a moment, about what it meant that he'd said that, the trust in it, the particular trust of a man who controlled everything, delegating the most important communication to someone else because he believed she'd do it better. Which publication? I asked. Judith named one, a long-form outlet, serious journalism, the kind that gave space to complexity rather than requiring it to be reduced. One interview, 30 minutes. The journalist is good. She'll try to get more than you want to give. I know how interviews work, I said. Mr. Kane said the same thing, Judith said, with the expression of someone delivering a message they don't fully understand. He also said to tell you, say what's true. Don't protect him. Just say what's true. I sat with that for a moment. Tell him I'll do it, I said. The journalist was named Claire Ashworth, and she was exactly what Judith had said. Good, unhurried, the kind of interviewer who lets silences go long enough to become uncomfortable and then longer, to see what fills them. We met in a cafe near the building, Neutral Territory, my choice, on a Thursday morning. She had read everything. I could tell by the quality of her questions, which began at the surface and moved inward with a patience that suggested she knew there was something beneath the surface worth reaching. I told her the truth. Not all of it. Some truths were not mine to give, and some truths were too new and too private to survive public air. But the shape of it, the thing that mattered. He kept her hidden to protect her, I said. Not to hide something shameful. There is nothing shameful in the situation. A woman he cares about was ill and vulnerable and needed to be safe. He made her safe. The secrecy was the protection, not the concealment of wrongdoing. Your relationship with him? Ashworth asked, with the directness of someone who has decided the preamble is over. I looked at her. That's private, I said, speaking on his behalf. I'm speaking about what I know to be true, I said. What I know to be true is that he is a more complicated person than the narrative being built about him, and that the people who know him actually know him, understand that his decisions come from a place that is harder to write about than secrecy and control. What place is that? Ashworth asked. I thought about the crest. About 11 hours in a hospital chair. About a key card in a sketchbook and the word mine held back with deliberate effort. Loyalty, I said. The kind that doesn't ask whether it's convenient. Ashworth looked at me for a moment. Then she wrote something down, actually wrote it in her notebook, which was itself a statement about what she thought of it. The interview ran on Friday. I read it in the studio alone before he'd seen it. It was fair. It was more than fair. It was the kind of piece that did what good journalism does, complicated the simple story without replacing it with a simpler one. He texted me at 9 a.m. Friday. Read it. You said it correctly. Thank you. Then, after a pause of 4 minutes, more than correctly, then after another pause, I owe you something. I texted back, you owe me nothing. That's how this works. He didn't reply for 20 minutes. Then, I'm not used to that. I put my phone down and looked at the installation and thought about a man who had spent his entire adult life keeping careful accounts of what was owed and what he owed, and what it meant to be told that the accounting didn't apply. I thought about what it meant to him to hear it. I thought he was probably standing at his window right now, looking at the city, learning the shape of something new. Chapter 4, The Argument, Violet. The following weekend we had our first real argument on a Sunday. Not the careful disagreements of the early weeks. Those had been professional, bounded, the friction of two intelligent people with strong opinions about a shared project. This was personal, which meant it was different in the way that personal things are always different. Louder underneath even when it's quiet on the surface, reaching for things that have nothing to do with the presenting issue. The presenting issue was the crest. The demolition order had been confirmed for March, 3 months away. And Adrian had decided, without telling me, without discussing it, with the unilateral executive decision-making that was his default mode when he was afraid, to accelerate the materials documentation timeline in a way that required me to be at the crest every weekend for the next 8 weeks, alone, with a fabrication team he'd already contracted. I found out from Nora, who had sent me the schedule in a calendar invite, on a Tuesday afternoon, while I was in the middle of something else. I went to his office. He was on the phone. He saw me in the doorway, saw my expression, and ended the call in 30 seconds, which I noted as a data point. Pre-November, the call would have taken as long as the call needed. You scheduled my weekends for 2 months without asking me, I said. He set down his phone. The demolition timeline. I know the demolition timeline. I have been inside the demolition timeline for 8 weeks. I have been the primary person thinking about the demolition timeline. I was keeping my voice level. I was aware it was costing something. You made a decision about my time without asking me. After 12 weeks of everything else, after the photographs, after the conversations about engineering and consent and letting things be what they are, you went ahead and scheduled my life. He was quiet. I could see him processing, not defensively, which would have been easier to be angry about, but genuinely, the way he processed things that caught him. I thought you'd want the time there, he said. The documentation, the materials, it's the work you care about. That's not the point, I said. I know that's not the point. He stood, moved around the desk, not toward me, just movement, the way he moved when something was uncomfortable. I made the decision because it needed to be made, and I made it the way I make decisions, which is alone, I said, without asking. That's the thing you're going to have to change, I said. Not the decision itself, the crest documentation. Yes, I want to do it. But the making of it without me. The arrangement of my life as if it's something you can schedule. He looked at me. Something in his expression was difficult, the look of someone confronting a pattern they know they have, that they've built their effectiveness around, being told directly that the pattern cannot apply here. The particular discomfort of a man who is very good at controlling things being told that this specific thing is not his to control. Right, he said. I know I'm right. Cancel the schedule. We'll build it together. A pause. He stopped, started again. I'm going to do this, repeatedly, the unilateral decision. I've been operating this way for 15 years and it does not turn off because I want it to. I know, I said. My voice had come down. The anger still present but no longer the primary thing. I'm not asking you to be different. I'm asking you to include me in the things that are about both of us. He looked at me. That's a reasonable ask. Thank you for noticing. Silence was no longer the argument's silence. It had moved into something else, the aftermath of a real thing, the particular intimacy of two people who have fought honestly and come out the other side still present. I am going to disappoint you, he said. In this specific way, multiple times. I know, I said, and I'm going to point it out every time. I'm counting on that, he said, something in that, the accounting of it, the acknowledgement that he needed the friction, that he needed someone who would not simply accommodate the pattern, was so honest and so unexpectedly vulnerable that it moved through the last of my anger and replaced it with something that was not quite tenderness but was in that vicinity. We'll build the schedule together, I said. Tomorrow, he said. If you're... Tomorrow, I agreed. He walked toward me. He stopped at arm's reach, the careful management still present, the space between us still deliberate, the new thing between us still young enough to require handling with attention. Are we? He started. I said. We're fine. This is what fine looks like when it's real. His expression did the thing, the unguarded thing, the real smile thing. And for a moment the 42nd floor and the crisis, and the headline and the schedule and all of it receded. And it was just a man looking at a woman who was telling him that the difficult version of things was the one she preferred. And the man was, for the first time in a very long time, actually believing it. That night he came to the studio at 8, after the building had emptied and the city was fully dark, and he brought dinner from somewhere, containers of something warm that smelled extraordinary, and a bottle of wine that I recognized, even without knowing wine particularly well, as not from the building's cafe. We ate on the studio floor, sitting cross-legged with the installation above us, the glass moving slightly in the climate-controlled air, the light doing what the light did. We talked for 3 hours. About everything except the things that had been consuming the week, no Varden, no headlines, no schedules. About his mother, who had loved this specific kind of November dark and called it the city's most honest hour. About my first piece, not the gallery shows earlier, the first thing I'd ever made with the salvage instinct, a window rescued from a condemned house in Ohio that I'd spent an entire summer light mapping, trying to understand what old glass did with afternoon that new glass couldn't. What happened to it? He asked. I left it in Ohio, I said. When I moved, I couldn't take it on the bus. You left the first thing you made. I left everything in Ohio except what fit in a bag, I said. The work I carry, the objects I leave. He was quiet for a moment. I keep everything, he said. I've kept things that should have been let go for years past the point of use. Alina, I said, not accusingly. Alina, the crest, certain ideas about how things should work. He looked at the installation above us. You've been teaching me something about that, about the difference between carrying and keeping. What's the difference to you? Carrying is active, he said. You choose it every day. Keeping is just inertia. The thing stays because you haven't decided otherwise. A pause. I've been keeping things for a long time. You carry things. I looked at him. At the man sitting on the studio floor with dinner containers between us and his jacket folded beside him and the controlled surface fully absent for the 3rd time this week, this person who kept revealing new rooms. You're learning, I said. At significant personal cost, he said with the almost smile. That's how learning works. He reached across the space between us, his hand briefly over mine. The specific contact, not romantic in the dramatic sense, just present, just the warm weight of a hand saying I am here and I mean it, lasted perhaps 5 seconds, and then he moved it back. We stayed until midnight. Then he walked me to the elevator and stood in the corridor and said good night, and I went down to the lobby and out into the cold, and I walked half a block before I stopped and stood on the pavement and looked up at the building. The lights on 18 were off. The lights on 17, as always, were on. And high above everything, on 53, a single window was lit. The window he stood at, the view he used to clarify the things that were difficult. I stood there looking at it for a long moment. Then I went home. Chapter 5. What Alina Asks Violet. The following Tuesday she asked me to sit for her. I arrived on the 17th floor on a Tuesday afternoon to find Alina with a new canvas stretched, and a directness in her expression that I'd come to understand meant she'd been thinking about something for several days and had decided to act on it. "I want to paint you," she said. I looked at her. "Why?" "Because you are the most interesting person in this building, and this building is my world at the moment, and I am running out of interesting subjects." She gestured at the canvases around the room, the abstracts, the architectural studies, the paintings that were beautiful and urgent and not quite sufficient for whatever she was reaching for. "Also because," a pause, "I want to understand you. I understand people better when I paint them." "What do you want to understand?" She looked at me steadily. "Why you stayed. When you found out about me, when the story ran, when the argument happened, I watched you. Through the feed. I know that is," she stopped. "I know that is an intrusion. But I have been watching this building for 8 months. I watch everything." "I know," I said. "I don't mind." She looked briefly surprised. "Most people would mind." "People aren't accustomed to being in buildings where everyone is watched," I said. "I've made my peace with it. Also," I paused, "I stayed because it's real, all of it. Him and the work in this building and you, even. It's the realest thing I've been near in 4 years in New York, and I did not come to New York for the unreal things." Looked at me for a long moment. Then she picked up a pencil and began to sketch quickly with the focused economy of someone who has been watching long enough that the sketch is a formality. She already knows the face. I sat in the chair by the window. The light came through the old glass at an angle I recognized from my own studio above. The November afternoon was gray and specific, the kind of light that doesn't flatter but doesn't lie. "He is different with you," she said, sketching. "Than he was with me." "Not better or worse, different. How?" "With me, we were very young emotionally, both of us. I was the first person he loved after his mother died. He was too much at first, too focused, too total. It frightened me." She paused, looking at what she'd drawn. "I asked him to pull back. He tried, but a person like Adrian trying to pull back, it does not look the way it does in other people. It looks like withdrawal, like punishment." "So it ended," I said. "It ended." Not badly, there was no terrible moment, just the slow recognition that we were wrong for each other in a specific way. She looked up. "He never stopped caring. That is the thing about him. He does not stop. The caring does not go, it just changes form. Into 11 hours in a hospital chair. Into a floor of a building," she said. "Into a medical team. Into the particular quality of attention he gives to the things he has decided matter." She looked at me. "He has decided you matter in a way that is different from how I mattered. More equal, he argues with you, he changes his mind. With me, even when we were together, he was protective in a way that became a kind of control. He could not stop himself." "Still does it," I said. "The unilateral decisions." "Yes, but you push back, and he lets you." A pause. "That is new. That is, I have not seen him let anyone push back in 15 years. The sketch was taking shape. I could see it from where I sat, the line of jaw, the angle of the light, the particular way she was capturing not the face but the quality of thought behind the face. "Are you afraid of him?" she asked. "At all." I thought about it honestly. "Not of him," I said. "Of what I feel, of the size of it, of what it would mean if it—" I stopped. "If it went wrong," she said. "Yes, that is the correct thing to be afraid of," she said. "Not him, what he makes you feel. Because he will feel the same thing, and two people feeling the same enormous thing at the same time it requires very good architecture." "I'm an architect," I said. "In the material sense." "I know," Alina said. "I think that is why he chose you." We were quiet for a while, the pencil moved, the light shifted. "Alina," I said, "how are you actually, not the answer you give." A pause, she set the pencil down. "Last scan was better," she said. "Better than the one before." The oncologist uses the word responding now, which is the word she uses when she is trying not to say improving, in case she has to take it back. A breath. I am cautiously. "That's enough," I said. "That is enough," she agreed. She picked up the pencil again. Outside the window, the city was beginning its evening transition, the light going the way of light in this city in November, and I sat in the chair and let Alina Vasic draw my face, and I thought about architecture. About what it takes to build something that can hold two enormous things at once without collapsing. About whether I was good enough at it. About whether, this time, I was going to find out. Chapter 6. The night before the Crest. Violet. Friday evening. We left for the Crest on Saturday morning. But Friday evening, the night before the first documentation trip of the new schedule, built together, the schedule that meant 8 weekends in the months before the demolition, Friday evening was different from every other evening in the 12 weeks we'd been in each other's orbit. He came to the studio at 6. He had his coat on, which meant he'd come from outside, not from upstairs. He stood in the doorway with the particular expression I'd catalogued as his arrival expression, assessment, inventory, the checking of the room's current state, and then he said, "Come up!" A question, not quite a command. The new register, the one between professional and personal that had no name yet and didn't need one. Penthouse? I want to show you something. We took the elevator to 53. The penthouse was as I remembered it from the dinner, though the low November light made it different, dimmer, more intimate, the city outside the windows a field of early dark. He led me through the main room, past the kitchen, through a door I hadn't been through before. It was a library, floor-to-ceiling shelves on 3 walls, the kind of shelves that are built rather than bought, dark wood, with the specific organized density of someone who reads seriously and keeps what they read. A desk in the corner, small and functional, entirely unlike the large executive desk in the office. 2 chairs by the window, worn in the way of chairs that are used, and on the 4th wall, the windowless wall, a single framed piece. I walked toward it before I understood what it was. It was a drawing, architectural, hand-rendered in pencil and ink, the particular precision of someone who was trained to draw this way, for whom the drawn line was a form of thinking. A building. Low-roofed, generous, with windows placed for light rather than symmetry, the Crest. In its original drawings before it was built, before the decades of seasons and the emptiness and the demolition order. Drawn by the hand that had designed it. In the lower right corner, M.W. Kane, 1983. "She gave it to me when I was 19, he said from behind me. "The week before she died. She'd been carrying it with her for years, the original design drawing. She said she wanted me to have it because," he stopped, started again. "She said she wanted me to have it because I was the only one who would understand that buildings are love letters, that when she designed the Crest she was writing something, not just building something." I stood in front of the drawing for a long time. "This is what you've been saving," I said. "Yes." "The building, this, the letter." A long pause. "Yes," he said. "That's exactly it. That's the thing I've been trying to say for 15 years and couldn't." I turned. He was standing near the door of the library, and his face was the unguarded version, the one that only came out in specific circumstances, in this building, in the late hours, when the controlled surface had finally given way to the thing underneath. "That's what we're documenting," I said. "The letter, the love letter and the materials, the windows and the beams and the way the light lands. We're recording the language she used." He crossed the room. He stopped in front of me, closer than arm's reach, the closest the penthouse had allowed, the closer distance of someone who has made a decision. "Yes," he said. His voice was very quiet. "And then we're going to bring it here," I said. "Into the building you built. The installation will be her letter inside your building. The thing she said inside the thing you made." He looked at me with the enormous unguarded thing, and I looked back. And the library was quiet, and the city was dark beyond the window, and the drawing of the Crest was in its frame behind me, and neither of us moved for a long moment. Then he put his hand against my face, the way he had in the installation on Friday night, with the same careful, specific reverence, and said, "I don't have language for what this is." "You don't need it," I said. "Some things are better before they're named." He kissed me again. Not carefully, this time. Not the restrained, first-time kiss of someone holding himself back. This was the second kiss, which is always the true one, the one where the restraint is set aside, and what you actually feel is what you give. And what he gave was the total, undivided, all-resources-directed attention that was his defining quality in everything, turned toward me, which was, I will not pretend I was prepared for it. I was not. I had known, theoretically, that this was coming, had been cataloging its approach for weeks. But knowing something is coming and being inside it are different states. I was inside it. We stayed in the library until very late. Talking, mostly. The particular talking of 2 people who have finally closed the distance and find that there is an enormous amount they want to say to each other, now that the saying is possible. He told me about his mother in a way he hadn't before, the specifics, the memories, the woman who had believed that buildings were language and had taught him, by example, to believe the same. I told him about Ohio in the winter, the specific blue of frozen fields, the way leaving had felt like the first sentence of a story. At some point he fell asleep in the chair across from me, not gradually, not with the social negotiation of approaching tiredness. Just suddenly, the sleep of someone who has been running on vigilance for 12 weeks and has finally, in this room, in this company, allowed the vigilance to rest. I covered him with the blanket that was on the arm of the other chair. The one that had been there long enough to be slightly faded, the kind of blanket a person keeps in their library because they fall asleep in their library. I sat across from him and looked at the drawing of the crest in its frame and the city beyond the window and the man asleep in the chair who had built 53 floors of steel and glass above the city, and who contained, inside all of that, the 19-year-old who had been handed a love letter in the form of an architectural drawing and had spent 15 years trying to keep it safe. I stayed until 2. Then I let myself out, took the elevator down, walked through the lobby into the cold. Tomorrow, the crest. Tomorrow the documentation began. Tomorrow we started the work of carrying what couldn't be kept. Tonight the city was very beautiful and very indifferent, and I was not afraid. Chapter 7. What I carry now. Adrian, later that night, who woke in the library chair at 3 a.m. This was not unusual. He slept badly, generally, the particular insomnia of someone whose mind did not agree that night was a different category from day. What was unusual was the quality of the waking, not the sharp alert of someone roused by the surveillance instinct, not the heavy fog of genuine exhaustion. Something in between rested, which was not a state he was accustomed to. The blanket was not one he'd put on himself. He sat with that for a moment. She had covered him with a blanket and left without waking him, which was, he tried to find the word for what that was. The word wasn't gratitude, exactly, though gratitude was in it. The word wasn't love, though love was in it. The word was something about the quality of being cared for without performance, without the care being presented as something to receive, without the expectation of a response, without the need to register it as a debt. She had simply done it. And left. He stood. Moved to the window he always moved to, the default position, the city below in its 3 a.m. configuration, quieter than any other hour, the lights reduced to the essential and the random. He thought about what she'd said, the letter inside the building, the thing she said inside the thing you made. He had spent 15 years trying to preserve the crest as a structure, to stop the demolition, to maintain the physical building, to keep his mother's work in the world as she had left it. And in 12 weeks, a woman with salvaged glass and a sketchbook had shown him what he'd been trying to do wrong. You don't preserve the letter by keeping the paper. You preserve the letter by carrying what it said. The installation, the glass and the timber and the light, translated from the crest into Kane Tower, his building built from hers. Her language inside his structure. Buildings are love letters. She had said that. He had spent 15 years knowing it was true without being able to say it out loud. And then a woman he'd watched for 11 minutes in a gallery in March had walked into a wrong elevator and said, in so many words, in the space of 3 months, I speak this language too. He thought about the weight of that, about how long he'd been carrying things alone, 15 years since his mother, 3 years since Alina, the relationship ending, then the illness, then the long sustained effort of keeping her safe. The crest, the board, the building, the company, 42 floors of careful construction, all of it maintained by the single engine of a man who had decided, at 19, that the only reliable strategy was to be the person who controls the outcome, and then a wrong floor. And then Violet Hayes, who had walked into the controlled system like weather, like something he hadn't engineered and couldn't manage. Something that simply was, that simply arrived, that had the very particular quality of being the thing you didn't know you were building toward until it was standing in front of you. He looked at the city. He thought, I am in love with her. He had said it, in the installation, Friday night, the words coming out in the quiet voice of the true statement. But saying it was different from sitting with it at 3 a.m., alone, with the blanket on the chair and the drawing on the wall and the building quiet around him. Sitting with it at 3 a.m. was the real version. This was the part where it became structural rather than confessed, the part where it went from something he'd said to something he was going to live inside. He was afraid. He was aware of being afraid, which was unusual. Fear was a state he identified and managed rather than experienced. But this was the specific fear of someone who has kept everything at a careful distance for a very long time and is now voluntarily reducing that distance to nothing. The fear of exposure. The fear of what happens when the thing you've protected most is no longer behind glass. He thought about what she'd said. I'm terrified. But I'm here anyway, he thought. Then we're both terrified. He moved away from the window. Looked at the chair where he'd slept, the blanket, folded neatly, placed with the specific care of someone who does things with attention. The mark of her in the room, in the small domestic gesture that contained more than it appeared. He thought, this is what it is to be seen, not managed, not assessed, not given the controlled version and finding it sufficient. But the actual thing, the man behind the 42 floors, behind the controlled voice and the careful management and the 15 years of going it alone, being seen, and being covered with a blanket and being left to sleep, he thought, I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of this. Then he went to bed. He slept until 6, which was 3 hours more than usual. In the morning, they drove north. End of part 4. Cliffhanger. They were at the crest when Nora called. It was the second Saturday of the documentation schedule, late afternoon. The November light coming through his mother's windows in long golden panels, and Violet was on a ladder photographing the original ceiling beams, and Adrian was below her holding the light panel with an expression she'd never seen from him before, something unguarded and private, the expression of a man in a place that unmakes him. His phone rang. He answered. He listened. She saw the change from 12 feet up on the ladder. The thing that happened to his face when the call came in. He ended the call. He looked up at her. Come down, he said. His voice was the controlled voice, the thermostat voice, the voice that meant something was wrong and he was managing it. She came down. Alina collapsed this morning, he said. She is in the hospital. They don't know yet what it means.